Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller and I'm here to help you fall asleep, so before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And like the video, I'd love to know where you're from and what time you're watching this, so leave it in the comments. Enjoy it. The abandoned ranger station at Olympic National Park. I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's something about the silence, the forgotten stories, the way nature slowly reclaims human constructions that speaks to me on a fundamental level. That's why, when my graduate advisor suggested studying the ecological recovery around abandoned structures in national parks for my dissertation, I jumped at the opportunity. Olympic National Park would be perfect, Dr. Reynolds had said, sliding a folder across her desk. Remote enough to minimize interference, diverse ecosystems to sample, and they have several decommissioned ranger stations dating back to the 1930s. I opened the folder to find maps, permits, and black and white photographs of simple wooden structures nestled among towering evergreens. One photo in particular caught my attention. Elk Creek Station, built in 1932, abandoned in 1964 after a particularly devastating winter. What happened to it? I asked, studying the austere building with its distinctive lookout tower. Official records say it was simply deemed too remote to be practical, Dr. Reynolds replied, but something in her tone made me look up. Though there are some less official stories. What kind of stories? She waved a dismissive hand. Local superstitions, mostly. Indigenous legends about that valley being spiritually significant. Reports from the last rangers stationed there about strange occurrences. Nothing that would interest a scientist, but I was interested, both as a researcher and as someone fascinated by abandoned places. The folder mentioned that Elk Creek Station had been left largely intact, with much of its furniture and equipment still inside, preserved by the Park Service as a historical site, but rarely visited due to its remote location. It was perfect for my research, an isolated human structure being reclaimed by one of the most diverse temperate rainforests in the world, untouched for nearly 60 years. 3 months later, I found myself hiking through the lush green understory of Olympic National Park's Quinault rainforest, the weight of my research equipment and camping gear heavy on my shoulders. My research assistant, Maya, walked a few paces ahead, consulting the topographical map. According to GPS, we should reach the old service road in about half a mile, she said, pushing a strand of dark hair from her face. Then it's another 3 miles to the station. Maya was a last-minute addition to the expedition. The Park Service had been reluctant to grant permits for a solo researcher to spend 2 weeks at such a remote location, especially with the unpredictable spring weather. When my original research partner dropped out due to a family emergency, Maya, a fellow ecology graduate student I knew only casually, had volunteered. "Have you ever done field work this remote before?" I asked as we trudged through a particularly muddy section of trail. "Not in the States," she replied. "I spent a summer at a research station in Borneo, though. No electricity, no running water, 6 hours from the nearest town." She grinned over her shoulder. "This will be luxury by comparison." I wasn't so sure. According to the briefing we'd received, Elk Creek Station had been without maintenance for decades. We'd be relying entirely on what we carried in, treating the structure merely as shelter from the elements while we conducted our surveys of the surrounding area. The old service road, when we found it, was barely discernible, a slightly wider path through the forest, reclaimed by moss and ferns, bisected by fallen trees we had to climb over or duck under. The going was slow, and the dense canopy overhead made the forest grow darker as afternoon faded toward evening. "We should make it before dusk," Maya said, though I detected a note of uncertainty in her voice. She was right, but barely. The forest opened into a small clearing just as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, illuminating our destination in an almost ethereal glow. Elk Creek Station stood like a specter from another time, a 2-story wooden structure with a square observation tower rising from one corner. Its dark windows reflected the dying light, giving the impression of a face watching our approach. The wooden siding had weathered to a silvery gray, but the structure appeared remarkably intact, if tilting slightly to one side where the foundation had settled. "Wow," Maya breathed. "It's like stepping back in time." I nodded, feeling a familiar thrill at encountering such a perfectly preserved abandoned place. But beneath the excitement ran an unexpected current of unease. Something about the building's silhouette against the darkening sky, the perfect stillness surrounding it, triggered a primal warning in the back of my mind. Dismissing the feeling as simple fatigue after a long day's hike, I adjusted my pack and stepped forward. "Let's check it out before it gets completely dark." A wooden sign hung askew beside the front door, still legible despite decades of rain and snow. U.S. Forest Service Elk Creek Ranger Station Est. 1932. Below it, someone had carved a symbol into the wood, a series of concentric circles with lines radiating outward like a stylized sun or eye. "Native American?" Maya asked, tracing the carving with her finger. "Maybe," I said, though something about the symbol's precision made me doubt it was that old. "Could be from the rangers who were stationed here." The front door was secured with a rusted padlock, but the Park Service had provided a key. It took some jiggling and WD-40 from my pack before the mechanism finally gave way with a reluctant groan. The door swung inward, revealing darkness and the musty scent of long-abandoned spaces. Our flashlight beams cut through the gloom, illuminating a main room that must have served as both office and living space. A heavy wooden desk stood against one wall, its surface covered in dust and what looked like old logbooks. A cast-iron stove dominated the center of the room, flanked by a simple table and chairs. Filing cabinets, their drawers partially open, lined another wall. "It's so complete," Maya said, sweeping her light across the room. "Usually these places get stripped or vandalized." She was right. Despite the dust and some water damage near the windows, it looked as though the rangers had simply walked out one day and never returned. Personal items still sat on shelves, books, a pipe, what looked like a hand-carved chess set. A heavy coat hung from a peg by the door. "The location protected it," I said, setting down my pack. "Not many people willing to hike this far just to steal a few antiques or spray paint graffiti." We continued our exploration, finding a small kitchen area with pump sink and ancient propane stove, a basic bathroom facility, long since non-functional, and stairs leading to the second floor, which contained two small bedrooms with iron-framed cots. The observation tower was accessible via another, narrower staircase, but we agreed to leave that for daylight hours after noticing the questionable state of the steps. As we set up our camping stoves to prepare dinner, I found myself drawn to the logbooks on the desk. The most recent volume was open, its last entry dated November 18, 1964. I gently blew dust from the page and tilted it toward my headlamp. "Final evacuation ordered due to structural concerns following seismic activity," I read aloud. "Equipment and personal effects to be retrieved in spring. Patterson and I will depart at first light. Last radio contact at 1800 hours confirmed." It was signed Ranger Robert Marsh. Seismic activity. Maya looked up from where she was filtering water. "I didn't know this area had earthquakes." "The whole Pacific Northwest does," I said, though I shared her surprise. Olympic National Park wasn't known for significant seismic events, but it's strange they never came back for their things. I flipped back through earlier entries, noting the increasingly anxious tone in the final weeks. October 30, another sleepless night. Patterson reports the same dreams. Request for early winter closure denied. November 5, third equipment malfunction this week. Radio working intermittently. Something scratching at the walls again all night. November 12, symbols found carved into trees half a mile from station. Similar to indigenous markings, but Patterson says no local tribes claim them. Shadows moving at forest edge. The final entries were fragmented, almost frantic. November 16, Patterson saw it. Description matches Marsh's encounter last week. Not animal, not human. Request for immediate evacuation submitted. November 17, radio dead. Patterson missing since patrol yesterday afternoon. Search until dusk unsuccessful. Will resume at first light. November 18, Patterson returned at dawn. No explanation for absence. Behavior erratic. Evacuation order finally received. Not soon enough. I closed the logbook, a chill running down my spine despite the warmth of our small stove. These weren't the dry, procedural logs I'd expected, but a chronicle of escalating fear. What had happened here in those final weeks of 1964? Find anything interesting? Maya asked, passing me a bowl of rehydrated stew. I hesitated, suddenly reluctant to share what I'd read. Something about those final entries felt private, almost intimate in their naked fear. And inexplicably, I felt a strange urge to protect Maya from whatever knowledge had so disturbed Rangers Marsh and Patterson. Just routine reports, I said finally. Weather observations, maintenance logs, nothing special. As we ate our simple meal in the gathering darkness of the abandoned station, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not just by the building itself, with its dark windows like vacant eyes, but by something in the forest beyond. Several times I caught myself staring at the windows, certain I'd seen movement reflected in the glass. Just wildlife, I told myself. Olympic National Park was home to Roosevelt elk, black bears, mountain lions, plenty of creatures that might be curious about the new inhabitants of this long-empty human dwelling. Later, as we settled into our sleeping bags laid out on the dusty wooden floor, we decided against using the ancient cots upstairs. Maya's voice came softly through the darkness. "Daniel, did you notice anything odd when we were approaching the station?" I turned toward her, seeing only her silhouette in the faint moonlight filtering through the windows. "What do you mean?" "The trees around the clearing," she said hesitantly. "They're all leaning away from the station. Every single one, like they're trying to get away from it." I hadn't noticed, but now that she mentioned it, I recalled the strange configuration of the forest edge, trees growing at unusual angles, creating an almost perfect circle around the building. "Probably just the way the light falls in the clearing," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Or some quirk of the soil composition affecting growth patterns. We can document it tomorrow for the research." "Yeah," she agreed, though she didn't sound convinced. "For the research." I fell asleep that night to the sound of wind in the trees, and what might have been scratching at the walls of the old ranger station. Just branches, I told myself, or small animals seeking shelter. Nothing to worry about. But in my dreams, I saw the symbol from beside the door, concentric circles with radiating lines, growing larger and larger until it became an eye staring directly into my soul. And behind me, something waited in the darkness of the forest, watching. I woke to the sound of rain pattering against the roof and windows, a gentle but persistent drumming that filled the old ranger station. Gray morning light filtered through dirt-streaked glass, revealing water stains on the ceiling that hadn't been visible in last night's darkness. Maya was already up, boiling water on our camp stove. "Sleep okay?" she asked, handing me a steaming mug of instant coffee. "Fine," I lied, unwilling to admit that my dreams had been plagued by visions of that strange circular symbol and shadowy figures moving just beyond my field of vision. "The rain might complicate our field collections today." "It's the Olympic rainforest," Maya said with a shrug. "We'd better get used to it." She was right, of course. The Quinault region received an average of 12 feet of rainfall annually, creating the lush, moss-draped ecosystem we'd come to study. Our research on ecological succession around abandoned human structures would need to account for this perpetual moisture. After breakfast, we geared up in rain jackets and waterproof pants to begin our preliminary survey of the area immediately surrounding the station. The work was methodical, establishing transects, cataloging plant species, taking soil samples, and photographing the curious way the trees grew leaning away from the building. "It's like they're bowing," Maya observed as she measured the angle of a particularly large Sitka spruce, or paying homage to the station. I'd been thinking the opposite, that they were recoiling, but kept the thought to myself. Probably just phototropism, I suggested. The clearing creates unusual light patterns. We worked through the morning, the rain eventually tapering to a fine mist that hung in the air like gauze, softening the edges of the forest. By midday, we'd completed our initial documentation of the clearing and prepared to venture further afield. "I want to check the condition of the access paths," I said, studying our map. "See how quickly they're being reclaimed compared to the clearing itself. I'll catalog the understory colonization along the building's foundations," Maya offered. "Meet back here in 3 hours." I nodded, checking my watch and GPS unit. Though we were never going far from the station, the dense forest and limited visibility made it easy to become disoriented. We'd established strict protocols for field work, including regular check-ins via handheld radios. The old service road we'd followed yesterday was my first focus. I documented the plant species overtaking the pathway, the condition of the soil, and the rate of tree fall across the former thoroughfare. The forest was reclaiming the human intrusion with remarkable efficiency, but something about the pattern struck me as odd. The vegetation seemed to be pushing toward the road from the surrounding forest, rather than simply growing up through it, almost as if the plants were deliberately erasing this human scar on the landscape. About a mile from the station, I came across a fallen marker post half buried in moss. Brushing away the green carpet revealed more of those circular symbols carved into the wood, not just one, but dozens, overlapping and interconnected in a pattern that made my eyes hurt if I looked at it too long. I photographed the marker, feeling that same inexplicable unease I'd experienced upon first seeing the station. The symbols didn't look like the work of bored rangers or even traditional indigenous carvings. They were too precise, too deliberate, almost mathematical in their execution. As I knelt beside the fallen post, I became acutely aware of the silence. The constant background noises of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, the scurrying of small animals had ceased. Even the omnipresent dripping of water from saturated foliage seemed muted. The forest felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. I stood quickly, overcome by the sudden conviction that I was being watched. Scanning the surrounding trees revealed nothing obvious, yet the sensation persisted, a prickling awareness of unseen eyes following my movements. "Just nerves," I muttered to myself, but found I was whispering, as if afraid to disturb whatever might be listening. I completed my documentation as quickly as thoroughness would allow, then began making my way back to the station, unable to shake the feeling of surveillance. Twice, I thought I glimpsed movement among the trees, not the distinct form of an animal, but something more fluid like shadow flowing between trunks. Each time I turned for a better look, there was nothing but the endless green columns of the temperate rainforest. Maya was already back when I returned, organizing samples at the old wooden table. "Find anything interesting?" she asked without looking up. "Some unusual colonization patterns," I said, deliberately casual, "and another of those circular symbols on an old marker post." This caught her attention. "I found more of them too," she said, pushing her notebook toward me. Her precise sketches showed the same concentric circles and radiating lines, but with variations I hadn't seen before. "They're all around the foundation of the building, mostly hidden by moss. I only noticed them because I was taking core samples." "Any idea what they mean?" She shook her head. "Nothing I recognize from indigenous symbolism in the region." But she hesitated, glancing toward the windows as if checking that we were alone. "Daniel, I found something else while you were gone." From beneath the table, she produced a leather-bound book, its cover darkened with age and water damage. It was hidden in a compartment under one of the floorboards upstairs. I only found it because the board was loose. The book was a personal journal, different from the official logbooks I'd examined yesterday. The inside cover bore a name written in faded ink, Thomas Patterson, one of the last rangers stationed here before the evacuation. "Have you read it?" I asked, feeling an odd reluctance to open the volume. "Just skimmed it," Maya admitted. "It gets strange, especially toward the end." Curiosity overcame my hesitation. I opened the journal to a random page about midway through and began to read. August 30, 1964, third month at Elk Creek. Marsh says I'm adjusting well to the isolation. If only he knew the dreams I've been having, always the same. The circles in the woods, the watching presence. I wake convinced someone is standing beside my bed, but the room is empty. I've started wedging my chair against the door at night. I flipped forward a few pages. September 18. Found more symbols today while marking trail boundaries. Same as the ones by the station entrance, but larger, carved deeply into an old-growth cedar. Marsh says they've been there since the station was established in the 30s, but they don't look weathered enough. Something about them makes my head hurt if I look too long. Further on, October 5, the dreams are getting worse. Not just at night now. Twice today I caught myself staring into the forest, minutes passing without my awareness. Marsh noticed too, asked if I was feeling all right. The symbols are appearing in my mind even when I close my eyes. October 12. Marsh finally admitted he's been having the dreams too. Said he didn't want to frighten me, but it happens to everyone who stays at Elk Creek long enough. "The forest gets into your head," he said. Called it forest hypnosis like it's some kind of joke. But I've seen how he flinches at unexpected sounds, how he stares into the trees at night. As the journal entries progressed into late October, Patterson's handwriting became increasingly erratic, sometimes trailing off mid-sentence or degenerating into frenzied sketches of the circular symbol. The content grew more disturbing. October 29, saw it today. Just for a moment at the edge of the clearing, not an animal, shaped like a man but wrong, proportions wrong, movements wrong. When it saw me looking, it retreated into the trees, moving like oil flowing uphill. Marsh says I'm suffering from isolation sickness, but his eyes say he's seen it too. November 4. The scratching at the walls kept me awake again. Marsh says it's just branches in the wind, but there's no wind, and the scratching only happens on the sections of wall with no nearby trees. It stops whenever I approach the wall, like it knows I'm listening. November 10, they're changing the forest. The trees near the station are different, twisted, growing wrong. I've started documenting the changes, but when I review my notes, the observations don't match what I wrote. Words change when I'm not looking. Marsh won't talk about it anymore. The final entries were fragmented, sometimes just a few words or disconnected phrases. November 15 saw it clearly. Watching from the tower, "God help me, not human, never was." November 16, the circles are eyes, they've always been eyes. Watching, learning, waiting. November 17, going into the forest. They're calling, no choice now. The station is theirs, always was. The journal ended there, the remaining pages torn out. According to the official logbook I'd read yesterday, November 17 was when Patterson had gone missing, only to return the following morning with no explanation for his absence. I closed the journal, finding that my hands were trembling slightly. "This is," I began, not sure how to finish the sentence. "Disturbing," Maya supplied, "but explainable, right? Isolation, stress, maybe carbon monoxide from that old stove affecting their thinking. Classic cabin fever." It was a rational explanation, one I wanted desperately to accept. But the precision of Patterson's descriptions, the way they aligned with my own unease since arriving at the station, made it difficult to dismiss entirely. "Right," I agreed, trying to sound more convinced than I felt. "Prolonged isolation in remote locations is well documented to cause perceptual disturbances. We should make sure that stove is properly ventilated before we use it." Maya nodded, but her eyes kept drifting to the windows, where afternoon was already fading toward evening. The persistent cloud cover and dense forest canopy meant daylight was a limited commodity here, with darkness settling in by late afternoon. "We should organize our samples and data while we still have decent light," I suggested, eager to focus on something tangible and scientific. We worked in companionable silence for a while, but I found myself repeatedly distracted by the journal sitting on the table between us. Finally, unable to concentrate, I stood up. "I'm going to check out the observation tower before it gets completely dark," I announced. "Get a better sense of the surrounding terrain." "Want me to come?" Maya asked, looking up from her sample labels. "No need. I'll just be a few minutes." The narrow staircase to the tower creaked ominously under my weight, dust and small debris raining down as the wooden steps shifted. At the top, a square room with windows on all four sides offered a commanding view of the forest canopy stretching out in every direction. The vista would have been breathtaking if not for the unsettling pattern Maya had noticed yesterday. From this elevated vantage point, it was even more apparent. The trees did indeed lean away from the station, creating a perfect circle in the forest canopy with the building at its center. The effect was too uniform, too precise to be explained by natural phenomena like phototropism or soil conditions. I took photos and made notes, trying to maintain scientific detachment, but feeling increasingly like I was documenting something that defied conventional explanation. As I turned to complete my circuit of the windows, movement at the forest edge caught my eye. There, half hidden among the massive trunks of ancient conifers, stood a figure. The fading light and distance made details difficult to discern, but something about its proportions seemed wrong, just as Patterson had described. It appeared human-shaped but oddly elongated, its movements as it shifted position unnaturally fluid. I fumbled for my camera, adjusting the zoom with shaking hands, but by the time I had it focused, the figure was gone. Only swaying branches marked where it had stood. Had I imagined it? The power of suggestion was strong, and reading Patterson's journal had certainly primed my mind for such sightings. Yet the prickling fear at the base of my spine felt too real, too primal to be merely psychological. As I lowered the camera, my eye caught something on the tower floor that had been previously hidden by dust and debris. Kneeling, I brushed away decades of accumulated dirt to reveal a familiar pattern carved into the wooden floorboards. The circular symbol, but larger and more complex than any I'd seen before. And it had been carved from beneath, the gouges pushing upward through the floor. The realization sent me scrambling for the stairs, nearly falling in my haste to descend. By the time I reached the main room, my heart was pounding and my breath coming in short gasps. "Daniel, what's wrong?" Maya looked up, alarmed by my abrupt return and obvious distress. I opened my mouth to tell her about the figure at the forest edge, about the symbol carved from below the floorboards, but something stopped me. A sudden, irrational certainty that speaking these things aloud would somehow make them more real, more dangerous. "Just a rotted step," I said instead, forcing a smile. "Nearly went through it. We should stick to the main floor to be safe." As night fell completely, bringing with it a darkness more profound than any city dweller could imagine, we prepared a simple dinner and discussed our research plans for the following day. Neither of us mentioned Patterson's journal, though it sat between us like a physical presence, a harbinger of thoughts too disturbing to voice. Later, as we settled into our sleeping bags on the main floor, the station creaking and shifting around us in the wind, Maya's voice came softly through the darkness. "Daniel, do you hear that?" I held my breath, listening. At first there was only the sound of rain resuming its gentle patter against the roof and windows. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching from the walls around us, like fingernails seeking entrance, or claws. Neither of us slept well that night. The scratching sounds continued intermittently until dawn, moving around the building as if something, or several somethings, were circling the station, testing its boundaries. We took turns keeping watch, though what exactly we were watching for, neither of us could articulate. When morning finally arrived, bringing watery sunlight through a break in the clouds, we were exhausted but relieved. Daylight made the previous night's fears seem overblown, almost silly. "Probably raccoons," Maya suggested as she heated water for coffee. "Or maybe branches scraping the siding." Except there aren't any trees close enough to touch the building, I pointed out, immediately regretting my words when I saw her expression falter. Well, whatever it was, it's gone now, she said with forced brightness. And we have work to do. She was right. We'd come to study ecological succession around abandoned structures, not indulge in ghost stories inspired by the ramblings of a ranger who'd clearly suffered some kind of psychological break. Science, not superstition, would guide our time here. We spent the morning organizing our samples and data from the previous day, then prepared to extend our survey area. The plan was to establish transects radiating outward from the station at regular intervals, documenting changes in vegetation patterns as distance from the human structure increased. I'll take the north and east quadrants, I offered. You take south and west. Maya nodded, checking her equipment. Meet back here for lunch around 1. Then we can process samples this afternoon if the rain holds off. The systematic nature of scientific fieldwork was comforting, providing structure and rationality in contrast to the disquieting experiences of the night before. I threw myself into my data collection, meticulously documenting plant species, soil conditions, and canopy coverage along my transects. But as I worked further from the station, I couldn't help noticing patterns that defied easy explanation. The forest composition changed subtly, with certain species appearing exclusively within specific distances from the building. Most striking was the distribution of deadfall, fallen trees and branches. Within about 50 meters of the station, all deadfall was arranged with the fallen ends pointing away from the building, like spokes radiating from a central hub. These patterns could have natural explanations, I told myself. Prevailing wind directions, subtle groundwater flow affecting root stability, slope gradients invisible to the naked eye but influencing tree fall. Yet the precision of the arrangement, the mathematical regularity of it, suggested intention rather than natural processes. Around noon, as I was completing my final transect before heading back, I came across an unusual formation. A circle of 7 western hemlock trees, each one dead but still standing, arranged in a perfect ring about 10 feet in diameter. At the center of the ring, the ground was bare, no undergrowth, no fallen needles, just exposed soil in a circular depression. I approached cautiously, my scientific curiosity overcoming my unease. The arrangement was too perfect to be natural, yet these trees would have begun growing decades, perhaps centuries before human settlement in the area. As I reached the edge of the bare circle, I noticed something glinting in the soil at its center. Kneeling, I brushed away the topsoil to reveal a metal disc about 6 inches in diameter, tarnished with age but clearly man-made. Engraved on its surface was the now familiar circular symbol, concentric rings with radiating lines, but rendered with a precision that seemed impossible for hand tools. I photographed the disc in situ before carefully excavating around it. It appeared to be resting on the surface rather than buried, as if it had been placed there recently, yet the tarnish and corrosion suggested considerable age. Another contradiction in a growing list of inexplicable findings. As I leaned closer to examine the engravings, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The circular pattern seemed to shift and pulse, the lines between the concentric rings vibrating with a life of their own. For a brief, disorienting moment, I felt as though I was looking not at a metal disc but through it, into some vast, incomprehensible space beyond. I jerked back, nearly falling over in my haste to break visual contact with the disc. My head throbbed with a sudden, intense pain, and my vision swam with afterimages of the symbol, glowing as if branded onto my retinas. "Just a migraine," I muttered, pressing the heels of my hands against my eyes. Triggered by visual pattern recognition, nothing supernatural. When the pain subsided enough for me to function, I carefully wrapped the disc in a sample bag without looking directly at the engraved symbol. Whatever optical illusion or visual trigger it contained, I had no desire to experience that disorienting sensation again. Checking my watch, I realized it was well past our agreed meeting time. Maya would be worried. I packed up my equipment and samples, including the carefully wrapped disc, and began making my way back to the station. The forest seemed different on the return journey, darker, more closed in, despite the midday sun. Several times I had to check my GPS to confirm I was still on the correct path. Distances seemed to stretch and contract. Landmarks I'd noted on the outward journey either missing or appearing in unexpected locations. When I finally emerged into the clearing around the ranger station, Maya was standing on the porch, scanning the forest edge with obvious concern. "There you are," she called, relief evident in her voice. "I was about to come looking for you. It's nearly 2:30. I checked my watch again, confused. It still showed 12:45, but when I raised it to my ear, I realized it had stopped. "Sorry," I said, climbing the steps to join her. "Watch stopped. Lost track of time." Maya studied my face, her expression shifting from relief to concern. "Are you okay? You look pale." "Just tired and hungry," I forced a smile. "Did you save me any lunch?" Inside, as we ate the simple meal of trail mix and jerky, I debated whether to tell Maya about the metal disc. Part of me wanted her scientific perspective on the find. Another part, growing larger by the hour, wanted to protect her from whatever strange influence it seemed to exert. "Find anything interesting on your transects?" I asked instead. She hesitated, absently stirring her tea. "Yes, actually. Though interesting might not be the right word, disturbing maybe." "How so?" "The trees," she said, looking up to meet my gaze. "The further from the station, the healthier they are. The specimens closest to the building show signs of stress, bark abnormalities, stunted growth, sap bleeding. And there's a pattern to it." She pushed her field notebook across the table. Her meticulous drawings showed trees with strange protuberances on their trunks, arranged in familiar circular patterns. "They're like growths," she continued, "but they form these perfect rings. And they're all facing the station, like the trees are watching it." She gave a self-conscious laugh. "I know how that sounds." "I don't think you're imagining things," I said slowly. "I've noticed patterns too, the deadfall arrangements, the species distribution." I hesitated, then reached into my pack, and I found this. I unwrapped the metal disc, careful to keep the engraved side down. Maya leaned forward, scientific curiosity evident in her expression. "What is it?" "Some kind of marker, I think. Found it in a ring of dead hemlocks about half a kilometer north of here." I turned it over, revealing the circular symbol. Maya reached for it, but I caught her wrist. "Don't look at it too closely," I warned. I had some kind of reaction when I examined it, possibly a triggered migraine from the pattern. She withdrew her hand, eyes widening. "You think it's the symbol affecting you, not just a coincidence?" I shrugged, rewrapping the disc. "I don't know, but Patterson mentioned headaches when he looked at the symbols too long. It might be some kind of optical illusion that affects the visual cortex." We spent the afternoon processing our samples and consolidating our notes, the metal disc sitting, wrapped and apparently harmless, on the table between us. Outside, clouds gathered again, and by late afternoon, rain was falling in sheets, drumming against the roof and windows with hypnotic intensity. The light faded early, forcing us to switch on our battery-powered lanterns. The old ranger station took on an eerie quality in the artificial light, shadows deepening in corners, ordinary objects transformed into looming silhouettes. "We should check the data from the soil samples," Maya suggested, visibly trying to maintain normalcy despite the growing tension we both felt. I nodded, grateful for the distraction. We had collected samples at various distances from the station to analyze pH levels, nutrient content, and microbial activity, all potential indicators of how the abandoned structure was affecting its immediate environment. The results were perplexing. Soil chemistry changed dramatically with proximity to the building, but not in ways that aligned with known effects of human habitation. Instead of the expected gradual changes, there were sharp demarcations, as if invisible boundaries existed at specific distances from the station. It's like concentric rings, Maya observed, plotting the data on graph paper. The same pattern again. As she spoke, the lantern flickered, its light dimming momentarily before stabilizing. We exchanged glances, both thinking of the power issues Patterson had documented in his journal. "Battery's probably just cold," I said, reaching for a replacement from my pack. As I did, my elbow bumped the table, sending the wrapped metal disc clattering to the floor. The sample bag tore as it fell, exposing the engraved symbol. In the lantern light, the metal seemed to glisten with an inner luminescence, the circular pattern shifting subtly as if breathing. Neither of us moved to pick it up. The scratching sounds from the previous night had resumed, more insistent now, no longer just at the walls but seeming to emanate from beneath the floorboards as well. "Daniel," Maya whispered, her voice tight with fear, "look at the windows." I turned slowly. The glass panes, previously reflecting our lantern light against the darkness outside, were now covered with condensation. And drawn in that condensation, or perhaps pressed from the outside, were dozens of the circular symbols, overlapping and interconnected across every window. As we watched in horrified fascination, more symbols appeared, forming before our eyes as if traced by invisible fingers. The scratching sounds intensified, accompanied now by a low humming that seemed to vibrate through the entire structure. "We need to leave," Maya said, already reaching for her pack. "Right now." "It's pitch dark," I reminded her. "Pouring rain. We'd never find our way back to the trail." "I don't care," she insisted. "Something's wrong with this place with that." She pointed to the exposed disc on the floor. I couldn't argue. Whatever rational explanations I'd been clinging to were rapidly disintegrating in the face of the inexplicable phenomena surrounding us. I moved to retrieve the disc, intending to rewrap it and pack it away, but as my fingers touched the metal, a jolt of electricity shot up my arm. The circular symbol flared with blue-white light, and the humming sound rose to a painful pitch. Maya screamed, pointing behind me. I whirled to see the darkness beyond the windows alive with movement, not the random motions of forest creatures or wind-blown branches, but deliberate, coordinated activity. Shapes moved in that darkness, elongated and fluid, pressing against the glass like curious children at an aquarium window. The scratching sounds converged on the door, no longer random but rhythmic, almost like knocking. 3 slow scratches, pause, 3 more. "The tower," I gasped, grabbing Maya's arm. "We'll have a better view, maybe see what's out there." We scrambled up the narrow staircase, the wood creaking ominously beneath our weight. The observation room at the top was cold, much colder than the main floor had been, our breath fogging in the air as we emerged into the square space. The windows here were clear of condensation, offering an unobstructed view of the surrounding forest and the clearing below. What we saw defied comprehension. The entire clearing was illuminated with a pale, blue-white glow that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. Within that ghostly light, the patterns I'd observed in daylight were starkly visible. The way the trees leaned away from the station, the perfect circle they formed around the clearing. But now those patterns extended into the forest canopy, visible as luminous lines tracing through the branches, forming an immense version of the circular symbol with the ranger station at its exact center. And moving through the forest between the trees were shapes, vaguely humanoid but wrong in proportion and movement, gliding rather than walking, their forms seeming to phase in and out of visibility like poor television reception. "What are they?" Maya whispered, her face ghastly pale in the eerie light. Before I could answer, a new sound rose from below, not scratching now, but a splintering crash followed by the distinctive thud of the front door being forced open. They were inside the station. "We have to get out of here," Maya whispered, clutching my arm with fingers that dug painfully into my flesh. "Right now." I nodded, trying to maintain some semblance of rational thought despite the overwhelming fear. "There must be another way down," I said, scanning the tower room. "A maintenance ladder, emergency exit, something." The observation tower had been built with large windows on all four sides to provide unobstructed views of the surrounding forest, but in our panicked ascent, we hadn't thought to block the stairwell behind us. Now, whatever had entered the station below was our only obvious escape route. Heavy, deliberate footsteps sounded on the stairs, slow, methodical, as if whatever was climbing had no need to hurry, confident in our capture. The sound was wrong somehow, too fluid for the weight it suggested, like liquid being poured rather than feet striking wood. Maya's eyes darted frantically around the small space before settling on a hatch in the ceiling I hadn't noticed before. "There," she hissed, pointing upward. Without waiting for response, she dragged over the room's only piece of furniture, a sturdy wooden chair, and climbed onto it, pushing at the hatch. It resisted briefly before giving way with a groan of rusted metal, swinging upward to reveal the night sky above. "It's a roof access," she said, already pulling herself up through the opening. "Hurry!" The footsteps on the stairs had reached the final landing. Whatever was ascending would be in the tower room within seconds. I scrambled onto the chair and reached for Maya's outstretched hand just as the stairwell door began to open. I caught a glimpse of something tall and unnaturally fluid, its form seeming to fill the doorway like smoke given temporary solidity. Then Maya hauled me through the hatch, and we were on the ranger station's roof, the cold rain instantly soaking us to the skin. The peaked roof was slick with rain and moss, its wooden shingles rotting after decades of neglect. We balanced precariously on the narrow ridge, the observation tower rising behind us, the ground a daunting drop on either side. "What now?" Maya gasped, rain plastering her dark hair to her pale face. Before I could answer, a shape emerged from the hatch, elongated fingers gripping the edge, followed by what might have been a head but was wrong in proportion and feature. It moved with terrible grace, unfolding from the opening like something not bound by normal physical constraints. We backed away along the roof ridge, struggling for balance on the slippery surface. The thing continued to emerge, revealing a form that approximated humanity but was distorted, stretched, its movements fluid in ways that defied anatomical possibility. And it wasn't alone. Looking down, I saw more shapes emerging from the forest, gliding across the clearing toward the station with that same impossible fluidity. They moved not like physical beings, but like thoughts given temporary form, ideas of bodies rather than actual flesh. "The trees," Maya suddenly exclaimed. "Look." I followed her gaze and noticed what she'd seen. One of the massive conifers at the edge of the clearing leaned, dramatically toward the station, its trunk bent at an angle that should have been impossible for living wood. As we watched, another tree slowly inclined inward, creating a potential bridge from the roof to the forest canopy. "They're trying to help us," Maya said, though her voice held more question than certainty. "Or trap us," I countered, eyeing the unnatural movement with suspicion. But with the entity now fully emerged onto the roof behind us and more entering the station below, we had few options. "I vote for the trees," Maya decided, already moving toward the nearest bent trunk. The distance was still considerable, at least 15 feet of empty space between the edge of the roof and the nearest branches. A jump was impossible. Yet as we approached the roof's edge, the massive tree bent further, groaning with the strain of its unnatural posture. Smaller branches reached out like fingers, stretching toward us with obvious intention. Behind us, the entity made a sound, not vocalization as humans would understand it, but a modulation of the air itself, like the space between its form and ours was being vibrated with purpose. "Now," Maya urged, reaching out toward the nearest branch. As if responding to her gesture, the branch extended further, closing the gap between us. She grasped it, testing its strength before swinging herself off the roof with a courage I wouldn't have thought possible minutes earlier. The branch dipped under her weight but held, and the tree seemed to cradle her, smaller branches curling around her arms to stabilize her. I hesitated only briefly before following, the entity's cold presence at my back overriding any fear of falling. As my feet left the roof, I felt branches curl around my body, not threatening but supportive, guiding me safely into the canopy. We scrambled through the trees, moving from one to another as they bent and swayed to create a living pathway away from the station. Below us, the entities flowed like quicksilver through the clearing, their forms distorting as they moved, sometimes stretching impossibly thin, other times expanding to engulf the space around them. "What are they?" Maya gasped as we paused in the relative security of a massive hemlock some 50 yards from the clearing. "I don't know," I admitted, still struggling to process what we were witnessing. "But they're connected to the symbols somehow, to the patterns." From our elevated vantage point, I could see the entire clearing now illuminated with that eerie blue-white glow. The symbols traced in light across the forest floor formed a complex design with the ranger station at its center, like a massive circuit board or a diagram of some incomprehensible machine. And the entities were taking positions at specific points within that pattern, their fluid forms stabilizing as they settled into place. It reminded me of electrons finding their orbits in an atomic model, or planets arranging themselves in a solar system. "It's some kind of alignment," I said, struggling to find words for what I was seeing. "Like they're activating something." The metal disc I'd found now made horrible sense. Not a marker, but a component in whatever process was unfolding below us. I'd inadvertently completed a circuit by bringing it back to the station. The glow intensified, pulsing now in a rhythm that matched the humming sound emanating from the clearing. The ranger station itself seemed to shimmer, its solid form becoming momentarily transparent with each pulse. "We need to get away from here," Maya said, her voice tight with fear. "As far as possible." I nodded, but as we prepared to descend to the forest floor, something caught my attention: movement within the observation tower, visible through its large windows. Not the fluid motion of the entities, but a human figure. "There's someone in the tower," I said, pointing. "Look." Maya squinted through the rain and darkness. "That's impossible." We were just there. Yet the figure was unmistakably human in proportion and movement. A man in what appeared to be a Forest Service uniform, moving purposefully around the tower room. One of the rangers, I wondered aloud. Marsh or Patterson? The figure paused, then turned toward the window facing our position. Even at this distance, I could see that something was wrong with his face. Not the fluid distortion of the entities, but a more subtle wrongness, like a mask that didn't quite fit. "It's looking right at us," Maya whispered. As if in confirmation, the figure raised an arm and pointed directly at our hiding place. Below, several of the fluid entities detached from their positions in the pattern and began moving toward the forest edge, flowing between trees with that disturbing, non-physical motion. "They're hunting us," I realized. "We need to move now." We scrambled down through the branches, no longer aided by the tree's unnatural movements, but not hindered either. As soon as our feet touched the ground, we ran, following a faint game trail that led away from the clearing deeper into the rainforest. The underbrush was dense, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. The rain continued to fall, turning the forest floor into treacherous mud that sucked at our boots. But fear drove us forward, the knowledge of what pursued us more terrifying than any natural hazard. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Maya stumbled, crying out as her ankle twisted beneath her. I caught her before she fell, supporting her weight as she tested the injury. "I can walk," she said through gritted teeth. "Just need a minute." But we didn't have a minute. Through the trees behind us, I could see flickers of that blue-white light moving with purpose, the entities tracking us through the forest. "Look for somewhere to hide," I urged, helping Maya forward as quickly as her injury would allow. A hollow tree, deadfall, anything. The forest around us was ancient, massive conifers towering overhead, their trunks wide enough that some could indeed provide shelter. But instinct told me the entities didn't rely on normal vision to track their prey. They seemed connected to the forest itself, using it as both medium and mechanism for their purpose. As we stumbled forward, the terrain began to slope downward, and the sound of rushing water reached us through the steady patter of rain. "A stream," Maya said, hope flickering in her voice. "Maybe we can use it to throw them off." We followed the sound, eventually emerging on the bank of a swift-flowing creek, its waters swollen with rainwater. Ordinarily, crossing such a torrent would be dangerous, but with the entities closing in behind us, the risk seemed acceptable. "We'll cross here," I decided, scanning the stream for the safest passage. "The current might disrupt whatever they're using to track us." Maya nodded, already slipping off her pack to hold it above the water. We waded in together, the icy current immediately soaking us to our thighs. The creek bed was slippery with algae-covered rocks, requiring careful foot placement to avoid being swept away. Halfway across, I glanced back toward the bank we'd left. The entities had arrived, their fluid forms pausing at the water's edge. They made no move to follow, instead spreading out along the bank, their shapes rippling with what might have been frustration or calculation. "They're not crossing," I said, hope surging. "The water stops them." We pushed forward with renewed determination, fighting the current until we reached the opposite bank. Climbing out, soaked and shivering but momentarily safe, we watched as the entities continued to pace the far shore. Then, as if reaching a collective decision, they began to move upstream, flowing parallel to the water's course. "They're looking for another way across," Maya realized. "Or they're hurting us," I countered, a cold dread settling in my stomach. The thought had barely formed when a flicker of blue-white light appeared through the trees downstream from our position. More entities were approaching from that direction, having either crossed elsewhere or manifested from the forest itself. "We're being surrounded," Maya whispered, clutching my arm. Looking around desperately, I spotted a dark opening in the hillside about 50 yards up the sloping bank, a cave or rock overhang that might offer temporary shelter. "There," I pointed. "That might give us some protection while we figure out our next move." We scrambled up the muddy slope, Maya grimacing with each step, but keeping pace despite her injured ankle. The opening proved to be a small cave, its entrance partially hidden by ferns and moss. Inside, it extended perhaps 20 feet into the hillside, the floor relatively dry and sandy compared to the sodden forest outside. "Let me check your ankle," I said once we were settled inside, fumbling in my pack for the first aid kit I'd brought for field injuries. As I tended to her moderately sprained ankle, wrapping it with an elastic bandage, Maya kept watch at the cave entrance. The rain had intensified again, reducing visibility in the dark forest to mere yards. "I don't see them," she reported. "But that doesn't mean they're not out there." "We need to figure out what's happening," I said, finishing with her ankle. "Those things, the symbols, the ranger station, they're all connected somehow." Maya nodded, pulling Patterson's journal from her pack. Miraculously, it had stayed relatively dry inside its waterproof case. "Maybe there are answers in here we missed," she said, opening the journal to the final entries. "Something about how to stop them or protect ourselves." I pulled out my headlamp, providing better illumination as we huddled together, poring over the journal's pages. Most of the entries we'd already read, documenting Patterson's deteriorating mental state and growing obsession with the symbols. But toward the end, between the fragmented final entries, were detailed sketches of the symbols arranged in different configurations. "Look at this," Maya said, pointing to a page where Patterson had drawn concentric circles with specific measurements noted between each ring. He was trying to map the patterns mathematically, like the formations we observed in the forest, I agreed. The spacing between affected trees, the arrangement of deadfall, all following these precise measurements. As we studied the diagrams, a pattern emerged. Patterson had been identifying points within the concentric circles where the radiating lines intersected, labeling each with what appeared to be dates. "These are seismic events," I realized, recognizing several major earthquakes that had affected the Pacific Northwest. He was correlating the symbol's geometry with earthquake activity. The last entry mentioned seismic activity, as the reason for evacuation, Maya recalled. But according to this, the quakes weren't a reason to leave. They were a result of whatever was happening at the station. The implication was staggering. If Patterson's research was correct, the symbols weren't just mysterious carvings. They were a form of technology, a system for either predicting or possibly even generating seismic disturbances. Further in the journal, we found a crude map of the Olympic Peninsula with 7 locations marked, each labeled with a different symbol variation. Elk Creek Station was at the center, with lines connecting it to each of the other points. A network, Maya murmured. The station isn't isolated, it's part of a larger system spread throughout the park. The final pages contained what looked like a desperate attempt to document an escape plan. Patterson had sketched the ranger station and surrounding forest, marking certain trees with X's and drawing arrows indicating a specific route away from the clearing. Notes in the margins referenced safe zones, where the entities couldn't or wouldn't follow. One section caught my attention. They can't cross living water. Rivers, streams, anything with current disrupts their cohesion. They can't enter sacred spaces either, the parts of the forest, the quinault protected with their own symbols. This isn't their world. Not yet. They need anchors to maintain presence. The discs are anchors. The station is the primary anchor. He figured it out, I said, excitement momentarily overriding fear. Patterson understood what they were and how to avoid them. But who are they? Maya asked. What are these entities trying to do? The journal offered no clear answer, but Patterson's scattered notes hinted at a theory. The entities were not from our physical reality, but from some adjacent dimension or plane of existence. The symbols served as bridges between worlds, and the ranger station had been built, perhaps unknowingly, on a point where the barrier between dimensions was particularly thin. They've been trying to cross over for decades, I summarized, piecing together Patterson's fragmented thoughts. Using the symbols to create weak points, using the station as a focal point. And now something's changed. They're stronger, more present. The metal disc I found, Maya realized. When you brought it back to the station, you completed some kind of circuit. A chill ran through me at the thought that I might have inadvertently accelerated whatever process the entities were undertaking. The strange alignment we'd witnessed from the tree, the pulsing glow emanating from the station, all of it part of some grand design we'd stumbled into. So what do we do now? Maya asked, her voice small in the darkness of the cave. I studied Patterson's map again, noting a pattern in his safe zones that corresponded to locations he'd marked with indigenous symbols, different from the circular patterns associated with the entities. We follow Patterson's escape route, I decided. Find one of these safe zones and wait for daylight. The entities seem stronger at night. Maybe in daylight we'll have a better chance of making it back to the main trail. Maya nodded, looking relieved to have a concrete plan. How far to the nearest safe zone? I measured the rough scale on Patterson's map. About 3 miles northwest of the station. If we follow this stream uphill, we should reach a ridgeline that leads directly to it. We rested for another hour, allowing Maya's ankle to benefit from the compression wrap in elevation. I used the time to organize our remaining supplies. We'd lost some equipment in our hasty flight from the station, but still had the essentials: water, some food, basic first aid, and our navigation tools. When we finally ventured out of the cave, the rain had slackened to a gentle mist, and the forest was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the undergrowth, only the soft patter of water droplets falling from saturated foliage. Do you see them? Maya whispered as we paused at the cave entrance, scanning the darkness. I shook my head. No, but that doesn't mean they're not watching. We set off uphill, following the stream as it narrowed and became rockier. Maya moved with determination despite her injury, and I kept a vigilant watch on our surroundings, alert for any flicker of that telltale blue-white light. For nearly an hour, we made steady progress without incident, the stream guiding our way through the dense forest. But as we approached what appeared to be the ridgeline marked on Patterson's map, The feeling of being watched returned with overwhelming intensity. "Daniel," Maya's voice was tight with fear. "Look at the trees." I raised my flashlight, sweeping its beam across the surrounding forest. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just the endless columns of ancient conifers disappearing into darkness. Then I noticed the pattern. Each tree trunk was marked with a faint, glowing imprint of the circular symbol, pulsing in sync like a network of beating hearts. They've been tracking us through the trees themselves, I realized. The entire forest is connected to them. As if summoned by this recognition, blue-white light began to coalesce between the trees ahead of us, forming into the by now familiar fluid shapes of the entities. They didn't approach, merely stood watching, their not quite human forms rippling in the darkness. "We're cut off," Maya said, turning to look behind us. Sure enough, more entities had appeared at our back, effectively surrounding us. The only path not blocked was directly uphill, toward the ridgeline we'd been aiming for. "They're hurting us again," I said, the realization bringing a fresh wave of dread. "Guiding us somewhere specific." "Then we go where they don't want us to," Maya decided, her jaw set with determination. "Through them." Before I could object, she pulled something from her pocket, the metal disc I'd found, which she must have taken from the table before our flight from the station. Without hesitation, she hurled it directly at the nearest entity. The disc passed through the fluid form like a stone through water, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. The entity convulsed, its shape disintegrating into wisps of light that scattered like mist in a strong wind. The surrounding entities recoiled, their forms compressing as if in pain or fear. "Run!" Maya shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward through the gap she'd created. We sprinted downhill, away from the ridgeline, choosing the steepest path where our momentum would give us the greatest advantage. Behind us, the forest erupted with that strange vibrating sound, the entities communicating, coordinating, recovering from their momentary disruption. "How did you know that would work?" I gasped as we ran. "I didn't," Maya admitted. "But Patterson wrote they need anchors to maintain their presence. I thought maybe destroying an anchor would disrupt them." It was a desperate gamble that had bought us precious seconds, but I could already see the blue-white glow reforming in the forest around us, the entities regrouping with alarming speed. We reached a small clearing where a massive fallen cedar created a natural bridge across another stream, smaller than the one we'd crossed earlier but still flowing with considerable force. Without slowing, we scrambled over the log, putting the water between us and our pursuers once again. On the far side, I noticed something carved into the trunk of an ancient Douglas fir, not the circular symbol we'd become familiar with, but a different design. A stylized thunderbird, its wings spread protectively, surrounded by wavy lines that might represent water or energy. "Look," I said, pointing to the carving. "This matches one of the indigenous symbols from Patterson's map. We might be entering one of his safe zones." As if confirming this hypothesis, the entities that had been pursuing us halted at the edge of the stream, their fluid forms agitated but not advancing. The blue-white glow that had been visible throughout the forest dimmed beyond the carved tree, as if crossing some invisible boundary. "It's working," Maya breathed, her voice tinged with disbelief and hope. "They can't follow us here." We continued deeper into what Patterson had identified as a safe zone, noting more indigenous carvings on trees and rocks, spiritual boundaries established long before the ranger station was built, protecting this section of forest from whatever dwelled at Elk Creek. After putting sufficient distance between ourselves and the entities, we paused to rest in a small hollow formed by the massive roots of an ancient spruce. Maya collapsed against the trunk, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "What were those things?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did we stumble into?" I had no good answer, only theories pieced together from Patterson's fragmented notes and our own terrifying observations. "Something not from here," I said finally, using the ranger station as a doorway between their reality and ours. "But why? What do they want?" Before I could formulate a response, A twig snapped nearby, and we both froze. Slowly, I turned toward the sound, expecting to see the fluid forms of the entities despite our supposed safety in this protected zone. Instead, a human figure stepped into view, an elderly indigenous man dressed in modern outdoor clothing but wearing traditional cedar bark regalia over it. He carried a walking stick adorned with feathers and carved with symbols similar to those we'd seen marking the safe zone's boundaries. "They want what all invaders want," the man said, his voice deep and resonant in the quiet forest. "A new world to colonize, new resources to consume." He studied us with keen eyes that reflected decades of wisdom. "You've been to the station. You've seen them. Now you need to decide whose side you're on in a war that's been fought here for generations." Keeping pace despite her injured ankle, the opening proved to be a small cave, its entrance partially hidden by ferns and moss. Inside, it extended perhaps 20 feet into the hillside, the floor relatively dry and sandy compared to the sodden forest outside. "Let me check your ankle," I said once we were settled inside, fumbling in my pack for the first aid kit I'd brought for field injuries. As I tended to her moderately sprained ankle, wrapping it with an elastic bandage, Maya kept watch at the cave entrance. The rain had intensified again, reducing visibility in the dark forest to mere yards. "I don't see them," she reported, "but that doesn't mean they're not out there." "We need to figure out what's happening," I said, finishing with her ankle. "Those things, the symbols, the ranger station, they're all connected somehow." Maya nodded, pulling Patterson's journal from her pack. Miraculously, it had stayed relatively dry inside its waterproof case. "Maybe there are answers in here we missed," she said, opening the journal to the final entries. Something about how the old man's abrupt appearance left us momentarily speechless. After fleeing supernatural entities that defied physical laws, encountering an ordinary human should have been comforting. Yet something about his calm demeanor in the face of the night's horrors suggested he was anything but ordinary. "Who are you?" I finally managed, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Jacob Nightwalker," he replied, leaning on his carved walking stick. "I'm a guardian of the boundaries. Have been for 60 years, like my father before me and his father before him." He gestured at the surrounding forest. "You're on Quinault land, not the reservation, but the sacred spaces our people have protected since before your government claimed these forests." Maya shifted beside me, wincing as she tried to take weight off her injured ankle. "Those things back there," she said, "what are they?" Jacob regarded us with penetrating eyes, clearly weighing how much to share. "The Quinault call them Esglottalstop I dab, the hungry ones. They exist in the spaces between, neither fully here nor fully there." He traced a pattern in the air, mimicking the circular symbol we'd come to dread. "Those marks are there, doorways. They're means of reaching into our world." "The ranger station," I said, pieces falling into place. "It was built on one of these doorways." He nodded grimly. "The strongest one. We tried to warn them back in '32, but federal agents don't typically listen to Indian superstitions." His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. By '64, they'd seen enough to evacuate at least. "Ranger Patterson," Maya said. "His journal mentioned sacred spaces where the entities couldn't follow. Is that why they stopped at the carved trees back there?" "Patterson was smart, scared but smart," Jacob confirmed. "After the evacuation, he came to our elders, seeking understanding. We taught him about the boundaries, the protective symbols. He helped us reinforce them before he left." The old man gestured for us to follow and began walking deeper into the forest, his movements surprisingly agile despite his age. We fell in step behind him, Maya leaning on me for support. "So these entities," I pressed, "what do they want? Why the ranger station? Why now?" Jacob didn't answer immediately, guiding us through the darkened forest with unerring confidence, as if he could see perfectly despite the minimal moonlight filtering through the canopy. After several minutes, we emerged in a small clearing dominated by an enormous western red cedar. Its trunk, at least 12 feet in diameter, was carved with elaborate symbols: thunderbirds, salmon, wolves and humans intertwined in a complex narrative that spiraled up as far as the light from our headlamps could reach. "This is one of our story trees," Jacob explained, reverently touching the intricate carvings. "It tells of the first arrival of the glottal stop Idab, over 500 generations ago, when the barrier between worlds was accidentally breached by a shaman seeking wisdom beyond human understanding." He traced one particular carving, a stylized human figure surrounded by concentric circles. "The glottal stop Idab cannot exist fully in our reality. Their nature is incompatible. They need anchors, physical points of connection. Vessels." "Vessels," Maya repeated, her voice hollow. "You mean human bodies?" "Sometimes," Jacob nodded, "though they prefer to create their own forms from the elements of our world: water, wood, stone. But human vessels allow them to move more freely beyond their doorways." "The ranger in the tower," I said, remembering the human-shaped figure with the subtly wrong features. "That wasn't Patterson or Marsh, was it?" "It was one of them. A vessel, yes, perhaps created from memories extracted from the station itself. Buildings remember in their way." Jacob leaned against the massive cedar, suddenly looking every year of his age. "The doorways have always been here, thin points in the barrier between worlds. For millennia, my people kept them sealed with rituals and boundaries. Then came the miners, the loggers, the park service, all inadvertently weakening the barriers." "And the circular symbol?" I asked. "What is it exactly?" "Their written language, you might say. A mathematical expression of the geometry required to bridge dimensions." He pointed to different carvings on the tree. "Our ancestors learned to counter their symbols with our own, creating protective boundaries they cannot cross." The immensity of what we'd stumbled into was overwhelming. This wasn't just a peculiar local phenomenon around one abandoned ranger station, but an ancient conflict spanning centuries, perhaps millennia, with cosmic implications. "You still haven't explained why now," Maya pointed out. "What's changed? Why are they suddenly so active?" Jacob's expression darkened. "The metal discs, anchors they created long ago, scattered throughout the forest. Most were found and neutralized by my ancestors, but occasionally one resurfaces." He looked pointedly at me. "Like the one you found today." Guilt washed over me. "I brought it back to the station," I admitted. "Completed some kind of circuit." "Don't blame yourself," Jacob said kindly. "They've been manipulating events for decades, arranging for their anchors to be found and returned. The Rangers in '64 almost completed the sequence before the evacuation interrupted it." He moved to a flat stone near the cedar's base and sat, gesturing for us to join him. Maya gratefully took the weight off her injured ankle while I remained standing, too agitated to sit. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Those things are still out there, still doing whatever they were doing with the station. They're attempting to create a permanent doorway," Jacob explained. "Not just a thin point where they can partially manifest, but a true opening between worlds. If they succeed, they'll no longer need vessels or anchors. They could enter our reality in their true forms." The implications were terrifying. And what would that mean for our world? Their reality operates on different physical laws. Their presence here would rewrite the rules of our existence, starting with the immediate area, then spreading. His weathered hands formed a sphere that expanded outward. "Imagine a bubble of alien reality expanding through our world, transforming everything it touches." "How do we stop them?" Maya asked, her scientific skepticism apparently shelved in the face of overwhelming evidence. Jacob reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a small object wrapped in cedar bark. Carefully unwrapping it, he revealed a disc similar to the one I'd found, but carved with indigenous symbols rather than the concentric circles of the entities. "This is a counterweight, a symbol of our reality that disrupts their mathematics. My ancestors created 7 of these, one for each of their anchors. 6 remain hidden in sacred sites throughout the forest. This is the 7th, kept by the guardians and only used in emergencies." "Like now," I guessed. He nodded. "The alignment you witnessed tonight is a rare event, a convergence of cosmic forces they need to create their doorway. It happens only once every 64 years. If we can place this counterweight in the station before dawn, their ritual will fail, and the alignment will pass. But the station is surrounded by those things, Maya protested. And they're inside it now. They cannot maintain full presence here indefinitely, Jacob explained. Even with their anchors and vessels, this reality drains them. By dawn, many will have retreated to recover their strength. That's our window. Wait, I said, a detail from Patterson's journal surfacing in my memory. He mentioned the station was the primary anchor. What did he mean exactly? Jacob's expression grew solemn. The ranger station wasn't just built on a doorway by coincidence. It was designed to be a doorway, its dimensions, its location, even the materials used. Someone in the Forest Service in the 1930s knew exactly what they were building. Someone working with these entities, I realized. A human collaborator. There have always been those who seek power beyond human understanding, willing to serve as vessels or assistants in exchange for knowledge. Jacob's face hardened. My grandfather tried to stop the construction, was arrested for his trouble. By the time our tribe could organize meaningful resistance, the station was built and activated. The revelation cast everything in a new light. The strange design elements of the station, its remote location, the unusual spacing of windows and dimensions of rooms, all carefully calculated to serve as a massive symbolic construct. So what's the plan? I asked, forcing myself to focus on immediate actions rather than the overwhelming scope of what we discovered. Jacob stood, his decision apparently made. I'll guide you to a safe shelter for the remainder of the night. At first light, we return to the station. I'll need both of you. The entities know you now, have tasted your presence. You can approach more closely than any stranger. Approach, Maya echoed. You mean as bait? As a distraction, Jacob corrected. While they focus on you, I'll place the counterweight in the heart of their pattern, the observation tower. It was a dangerous plan with numerous potential failure points, but we had little choice. The alternative was allowing these interdimensional entities to establish a permanent foothold in our reality, with consequences too horrific to contemplate. We followed Jacob deeper into the protected zone, eventually reaching a small cabin hidden among massive trees. Built in traditional Quinault style but with modern materials, it served as a guardian's outpost, he explained. Inside was basic but comfortable. A wood stove, bunks, dried food, and most importantly, protective symbols carved into every beam and post. Rest, he advised, stoking the fire. Dawn comes in 4 hours. We'll need all our strength. Despite the relative safety and warmth of the cabin, sleep came fitfully. My dreams were haunted by fluid shapes moving just beyond my vision and concentric circles that pulsed with malevolent purpose. When Jacob finally woke us, I felt hardly rested at all. Outside, the forest was transforming from absolute darkness to the gray half-light of pre-dawn. A heavy mist hung between the trees, limiting visibility to mere yards. Jacob seemed to view this as favorable. The mist will help conceal our approach, he said, checking his equipment, the counterweight carefully wrapped and stored in a deerskin bag, along with other items whose purpose he didn't explain. We set off, moving quietly through the forest. Maya's ankle, while still tender, had improved enough for her to walk unassisted, though at a slower pace than ideal. Jacob led us on a circuitous route that followed streams wherever possible, using the natural barriers that the entities seemed reluctant to cross. As we neared the ranger station, Jacob paused to paint our faces with a mixture he produced from another pouch, a dark substance that smelled of cedar and some other unidentifiable elements. Camouflage, he explained, not for human eyes. The clearing around the station emerged gradually from the mist as we approached. The building stood as we left it, but the supernatural illumination from the previous night had faded. The entire area had a depleted feel, as if the land itself was exhausted from the energy that had coursed through it. Jacob signaled for us to spread out, pointing Maya to approach from the south, me from the north. while he would circle to the east side where the tower stood. The plan was simple in concept. Maya and I would create disturbances at opposite sides of the clearing, drawing attention, while Jacob made for the tower. "Wait for my signal," he whispered. "When you see the Thunderbird begin." He melted into the mist before I could ask what he meant, leaving Maya and me to take our positions at the forest's edge. From my vantage point, I could see no movement around the station, no sign of the fluid entities that had pursued us the previous night. The building looked almost normal in the gray dawn light, just an abandoned structure slowly being reclaimed by nature. But the trees still leaned away from it in that perfect circle, and now that I knew to look, I could see the subtle patterns in the ground around it. Depressions and mounds arranged in the familiar concentric circles, visible even through the ground cover. A flash of movement caught my eye, not the fluid motion of the entities, but a bird taking flight from the tower roof. A raven, its black wings spread against the lightening sky. It circled once, twice, then emitted a cry unlike any I'd heard from a raven before, deeper, more resonant, almost like human speech. The Thunderbird's signal. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the clearing and began walking directly toward the station, making no attempt at stealth. From the corner of my eye, I saw Maya doing the same from the opposite side. Our breath fogged in the cool morning air as we converged on the building that had nearly claimed our lives hours earlier. For a moment, nothing happened. The station remained still and silent, no sign of awareness of our approach. Then, as I reached the midpoint of the clearing, the quality of the air changed. A sudden densening, like humidity instantly increasing to saturation point. From the ground, the walls, even the air itself, they emerged, the fluid entities taking shape more sluggishly than before but no less menacing. Three formed between me and the station, their not quite human forms rippling as they solidified. Similar shapes materialized around Maya. They didn't attack immediately, seeming almost confused by our deliberate approach. I continued walking forward, heart pounding but steps steady, drawing their attention as planned. From beyond the entities, I caught glimpses of Jacob's approach, a shadow moving with surprising speed along the eastern edge of the clearing, closing in on the tower while the entities focused on Maya and me. One of the entities nearest me suddenly convulsed, its form rippling more violently as it oriented toward the tower. It had spotted Jacob. The other entities reacted to its distress, beginning to flow in his direction with increasing speed. "Now," I shouted to Maya, abandoning the stealth portion of our plan. We both broke into runs, charging directly at the nearest entities. The sudden aggression seemed to confuse them further, their fluid forms wavering as if unsure how to respond to prey that had become predator. I collided with one entity, experiencing a sensation like running through gelatin, resistance without solidity, cold without temperature. The contact sent jolts of electricity through my nervous system, momentarily paralyzing my limbs, but momentum carried me through. Behind me, the entity's form destabilized, partially collapsing before beginning to reform. Maya had similar success, disrupting the entities in her path long enough to create chaos and confusion. Jacob, meanwhile, had reached the station and was scaling the exterior wall to the tower with surprising agility for his age, aided by what looked like hand and foot holds that I hadn't noticed before, perhaps part of the indigenous countermeasures built into the structure over generations. More entities were emerging now, flowing from the station itself, at least a dozen joining the confrontation. Among them was the human-formed vessel we'd seen in the tower, now moving with the same fluid grace as the others, but maintaining its ranger-like appearance. It pointed at Jacob, and several entities converged on the tower. They flowed up the walls like living mercury, gaining rapidly on the old guardian. "Jacob!" I shouted in warning, but he was already at the tower window, smashing through the glass and disappearing inside. The station seemed to shudder in response, a vibration running through its structure that I felt rather than heard. The entities froze momentarily, then redoubled their efforts to reach the tower, flowing faster with what appeared to be desperation. Maya and I could only watch, having accomplished our part of the plan. The entities ignored us now, focused entirely on stopping Jacob from completing his task. Inside the tower, blue-white lights suddenly flared, the same unearthly illumination we'd witnessed the previous night, but concentrated and intense. It pulsed outward in expanding rings like ripples in a pond. Where the light touched the entities, they recoiled, their forms destabilizing. A high-pitched keening filled the air, modulating through frequencies that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The entities were communicating, coordinating, or perhaps screaming. The human vessel reached the tower window, pulling itself inside with unnatural strength. For a moment, the light dimmed and my heart sank. Jacob had been intercepted. Then came an explosion of blinding radiance from every window of the tower, so intense I had to shield my eyes. When my vision cleared, I saw the human vessel falling, or perhaps being thrown, from the tower window. It struck the ground with a wet, heavy sound, its form instantly losing cohesion, melting into a shapeless mass that rapidly evaporated like water on hot stone. The remaining entities were in full retreat, their fluid forms stretching thin as they flowed back toward the forest, away from the station that now pulsed with alternating patterns of blue-white light and a warmer, amber glow that somehow felt more natural, more of this world. "It's working," Maya called, limping toward me across the clearing. Jacob's counterweight is disrupting their doorway. The vibration in the air intensified, the station itself seeming to flicker between solidity and transparency. The concentric patterns in the ground around it began to glow, but unlike the previous night's blue-white illumination, this light was golden, emanating from indigenous symbols that had been hidden beneath the surface. As the sun's first direct rays touched the tower, the entire station shimmered like a mirage, then stabilized with a concussive wave of energy that knocked both Maya and me off our feet. When we stood again, the ranger station looked different, still the same physical structure, but somehow less threatening, less wrong. The trees around the clearing no longer leaned away but stood straight and natural. From the station entrance emerged Jacob, moving slowly, supporting himself heavily on his carved walking stick. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but his eyes shone with triumph. "It's done," he said as we reached him. "The counterweight is in place. Their doorway is sealed for another 64 years at least." "And the entities?" I asked, scanning the forest edge where they had disappeared. "Banished back to their own reality," Jacob replied. "Those that were fully manifested anyway. Some may linger in the deeper forest, but without their doorway they'll gradually fade, unable to maintain presence in our world." He looked up at the station, now peaceful in the morning light. "Patterson would be pleased. He helped design the counterweight, you know. Said it was the least he could do after bringing the metal disc back in '64. So that's how it started back then too," Maya realized. "Another researcher finding one of their anchors." Jacob nodded. "The cycle repeats. They're patient. They'll try again when the alignment returns." "In 64 years," I said, feeling an obligation forming. The knowledge we now possessed couldn't be lost, forgotten until the next crisis. "In 64 years," Jacob confirmed, studying me with knowing eyes. "When new guardians will be needed." We helped Jacob back to his cabin, where he treated Maya's ankle with traditional remedies, and shared more of the history that wouldn't be found in any official park documents. The ancient conflict between dimensions, the role of the Quinault as guardians of the boundaries, the periodic attempts by the entities to establish permanent presence in our world. He never directly asked us to continue his work, to become the next generation of guardians, but the invitation hung in the air nonetheless. By the time we were ready to depart, hiking back toward the main trail and civilization, I knew we were irrevocably changed. The world I'd understood through science and rational inquiry now seemed far larger, far stranger, and far more wondrous and terrifying than I'd ever imagined. "What will you tell your dissertation committee?" Maya asked as we emerged from the forest onto the maintained trail, the ordinary world of hikers and rangers and visitors centers suddenly feeling surreal in its mundane normalcy. I considered the question. Our original research on ecological succession around abandoned structures seemed trivial now, though we had collected enough legitimate data to complete the project. The truth, I decided, at least the parts they'll believe. Unusual growth patterns around the station, evidence of indigenous influence on forest development, maybe even the mathematical precision of certain ecological arrangements, but not the interdimensional entities trying to invade our reality. Maya's tone was lightly teasing, but her eyes were serious. That knowledge has its own guardians, I replied, thinking of Jacob and his ancestors, of Patterson and perhaps others who had glimpsed beyond the veil of ordinary reality. As we continued down the trail, I found myself already planning a return to Olympic National Park. Not immediately, but soon. There was so much more to learn from Jacob while he was still able to teach. So many boundaries to understand and protect. Behind us, hidden once more in the depths of the Quinault rainforest, the abandoned ranger station stood silent, its windows dark, its doors secured. To casual observers, just another forgotten human structure being reclaimed by nature. To those who knew its secrets, a sealed doorway between worlds, a monument to an ancient conflict, and a reminder that some places are abandoned for very good reasons. The circular symbols were dormant now, their power neutralized by Jacob's counterweight. But in 64 years, the alignment would return. The entities would seek entry once more, and the guardians would be waiting.